Thank you very much, and it's great to see so many faces that I know, actually, quite unexpected, to be able to recognize very, very many of you. So it's great to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. I was quite challenged, actually, by the theme you gave me, how liturgists of the Jungmann Society can contribute to the development of the UAP. I actually hadn't thought about that issue, to be honest. I designed the program for the discernment of the UAP globally, and liturgy was a big part of that program. We made liturgy a central part of the week that we spent together. We ended with a special Eucharist in the Camerette, and before that Eucharist, each of us lit a candle in front of the altar of St. Ignatius in the Jesuit. So we were very conscious about building special Eucharists and special prayer sessions that would be integrated with and not just kind of added on top or at the side of the discernment about the preferences that helped Father General actually choose the preferences that went to the Pope. I put this together in 4 areas. The UAPs as part of a dream of God for humanity, imagination and liturgy and the call to freedom, and discernment and its role in the UAP development. Time is short, so I haven't really had time to write a paper on this. So they're, if you like, initial sparks that I think integrate well with your journey as people who are liturgists in the church and in the society. And I hope they can stimulate further reflection from you who have much more expertise than I have in the area of liturgy. How's my speed, by the way? Irish people can sometimes speak with a strong accent and too quickly. Is it okay? Okay, thank you. So apostolic preferences are the society dreaming for the next 10 years. It's the dream of the society to do these things for the next 10 years. It's the society connecting with God's dream for our broken planet today. And liturgy, as you know, is this expression, this search, this communion with the dream of God, expresses that dream, expresses that search. So I see in the concept of dreaming a real connection between the apostolic preferences, which can sometimes seem much too managerial. And so we need liturgists who can bring it further away from the managerial and into this greater realm of creating God's kingdom. It's also looking for possibility. A friend of mine said, he's a theologian teaching in the Greg, he said, Jesuits today, what's our mission? And he said, we're to be detectives of grace. Going around like Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes is the big English detective, I guess Inspector Poirot in French, and I'm not sure who in the Spanish-speaking world, but we're looking for grace. Where's God at work? Where's God active? Where's the Trinity moving? So often the church is seen as a detectives of disgrace, pointing out sin, problems. And of course, sin is part of our human condition, but the search for grace, where God is at work. The same teacher in the Greg said, he was joking one night after a few glasses of Chianti, and he said, what's the most frequent verb, John, that follows the word bishop in the news media? And I said, what do you mean? He said, the most frequent word, he said, is bishop warns, or bishop condemns, or bishop blames. I said, well, that could be the media, misrepresenting these poor bishops. But it's this issue of detectives of grace, it's very Ignatian. Detectives of disgrace, warning about the dangers of the world, very Irish, when I was growing up. So the four preferences, showing the way to God, walking with the excluded and those whom society throws aside. I love this phrase of Pope Francis, those considered worthless. Journeying with young people towards a hope-filled future and caring for our common home. And when Father Sosa was formalizing these preferences, some of us said, those phrases are quite long and they're very bad if you're marketing them. Nobody will remember them. He said, well, I don't want preferences like the last time. China, Roman houses, intellectual apostolate, etc. I want a verb of motion that moves people, showing the way to God, walking with the excluded. I want to move people, help to move people. Again, a connection, I think, to liturgy. And I love this picture of Pope Francis. He's certainly excited about something there. He's passionate. The preferences are missions from the Pope, linking us with the universal church. Going back to dream, Robert Greenleaf, who wrote the book Servant Leadership many years ago, nothing much happens without a dream. For something really great to happen, it takes a really great dream. A wonderful quotation, especially for a world that's often tired or cynical. So how can liturgy link people with a dream? I know when I preach on Sundays, you can feel it when you're saying something that connects with people's lives and when you're giving hope. You can really feel it. I remember once preaching on the raising of Lazarus, and I talked about how so often in our lives we're in this little tomb on a ledge, cold, quiet, not even hoping for much. And we hear Jesus saying, "Come forth." People came to me afterwards and said, and they shared such personal things about how they had felt stuck in their lives or after someone who had died. Thank you for inviting me to dream in a different way or to see that there was a new possibility. I won't read all that quotation, it's frightening, but it's from this book, Dreams, Memory and Imagination in Byzantium. It's just a book I came across about the link of liturgy to dreams. And you who are more experts will probably know better sources that link this concept of a dream for humanity with liturgy. And so much of Scripture presents a dream. The prophet Isaiah, in the middle of an exile, doesn't berate the people for their past sins, at least in this part of the book of Isaiah. He says, he paints a picture of a future. Things can be different. Every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain and hill laid low. And the preferences are a dream. Yes, we can denounce poverty and injustice. That will be kind of depressing. We need to do it, but we also need to paint a picture of how our world can be different, of how our young people can find a hope-filled future, of how our common home can be moved onto a better path. So often we hear ourselves denouncing injustices, and it's necessary. We also need to paint a picture that gives hope. The preferences inherent in the way the general phrases them moves us towards hope. Number 3, young people towards a hope-filled future. Number one, showing the way to God, accompanying the poor. So hope and a dream. The journey, it's a pilgrimage. And somebody said it's from fearless contemplation of what is. Yes, we have to see poverty as it is and injustice, but we have to imagine with the Lord what might be. To imagination. By the way, stop me after about 35 minutes because I want to leave time for questions. I'll screech to a halt no matter where I am. This great question of Michael Warren, who is really imagining your life for you? Really imagining your life for you. When I was a young kid in Ireland, Ireland was traditionally Catholic in the 60s, and saints like Dominic Savio and people like that were really, they shaped my life. I think now it's more secular saints like Messi, the football player, or famous singers who imagine young people's lives for them. And when I give retreats to young people, as I sometimes do, this is a question that provokes a day of conversation. If you ever work with young people and you're worried about the time it might take, there's a question. It will give you conversation for a day. Who's really imagining your life for you? And liturgy asks those kinds of prophetic questions, just in the texts, especially the scriptural texts, that get below our defenses and provokes what Pope Francis calls squilibrio. Squilibrio is this great word of Pope Francis. It means in Italian being off balance. And he challenged, it's a very challenging word, especially for me, because he was kind of denouncing planning. And I'm in charge of planning for the Society of Jesus. So he said, I don't like these dioceses that have plans of 50 pages long and that everything is worked out and there are commissions and councils. He said, forget it. Give me a spontaneity. Give me squilibrio. So I rushed to the dictionary to find out what squilibrio meant. So it's being off balance. This sense of being put off balance. And I think that's part of liturgy also. It somehow disturbs us. It somehow puts us off balance. And we can change. We can be converted. You don't get converted unless you feel disturbed or off balance. I love this quote from C.S. Lewis. I didn't go to religion to make me happy. I knew that a bottle of port would do that. If you want a religion to make you feel really comfortable, I certainly don't recommend Christianity. So squilibrio, liturgy and squilibrio and imagination. Sola, I love this quote from Dorothy Sola. What do prayer and poetry, and I think liturgy we can say, have in common? They connect us with our hopes. Possible's slow fuse is lit by imagination. Imagination, rediscovery of our faculty of possibility. And you all know from leading liturgies how liturgy can be so rich in helping people explore possibility, moving towards salvation. The challenge, of course, is that media train us to regard our own life as trivial, shrink our imagination. Eternity is now a perfume. Our imagination gets shrunk by so many forces. Liturgy expands our imagination. Poetry expands our imagination. And this great quote from William Lynch, all around us, imagination is traumatized and addictive. But imagination is also a source of healing. Christian faith is a form of imagination shaped by Christ as Lord of imagination, learning to imagine reality with God. I'm sure that has resonances for you as liturgists. To imagine reality with God. Discernment of the UAPs and the role of liturgy. I spoke to you about how liturgy played a vital role during the UAP discernment. It gave us space to dream and to imagine and to discern. So discernment and liturgy. My fourth point is liturgy and liberation. Our faith is about liberation for myself and for others. Liberation. Again, coming from an Irish background, that word liberation would not have been the first word that came to mind when I thought about the church or about faith. But liberation. A friend of mine who's a psychologist in Brussels, he was out for a beer with me one night. We were in Belgium, so Belgian beer. And he asked me, what are the spiritual exercises? So I thought, this is great, a chance now to get this quite famous psychologist on board with the exercises. So I gave a long explanation about consolation and desolation and the rules for the different weeks and 2 standards. And he ordered a second beer at that stage. But he said, but John, surely it's about liberation. I think, yes. And liberation. The exercises, liberation. The preferences. Liberating humanity. Liberating myself. So many resonances there. So the UAPs give us 4 compass points for liberation. Finding the way to God and showing the way to God. Let me play a piece which it's the General's favorite hymn for the Ignatian year, the one by Cristobal Fones. I'll play the international video version. I prefer the Spanish one, but just...
Al final de la vida llegaremos con la herida convertida en cicatriz. Life will tempt us to count the cost of loving, winding paths taking their toll within us, as we stumble once again over the same stone, despairing that we ever will walk freely.
Toutefois nous sommes les enfants du Dieu de l'amour, de vrais chercheurs assoiffés de réponses. En nous tu as semé tes plus grands espoirs, afin que ton royaume puisse fleurir. À la fin de la vie nous arriverons avec nos blessures devenues cicatrices.
In ourselves we will wage a conflict mortal. Ranks of time will surround, pressing upon us, while our hearts carry scars of every battle, and rejoicing and music seem a lost dream. Y con todo seguiremos bailando por
porque así somos humanos en tu estela, portadores de un fuego inextinguible, creyentes en un mundo sin fronteras. Al final de la vida llegaremos con la herida convertida en cicatriz.
Oui, nous sommes fragiles mais passionnés, des rêveurs qui ne se découragent pas. Non, jamais nous ne renoncerons au matin, même si la tempête nous assaille.
Y si acaso se agrietan los motivos por los que un día elegimos tu bandera,
even in our weakness we shall walk beside you, because your good news is life to every nation. At the end of our days we will abide, with your love and grace to heal our every wound.
So I hope Cristobal Fornes was watching on the link. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful hymn. The words are so Ignatian, so moving. Portadores de un fuego inextinguible. Sorry to the Spanish speakers here. Bearers of this inextinguishable fire. Every time I hear it, there's some phrase that moves me. A different phrase moves me every time. The General loves it. He says it's exactly our spirituality, that our vulnerability, as Rock said earlier, gets worked with by God over time and gets not washed away. It becomes a scar. Some kind of healing happens, some miracle of grace that moves us and that changes us and that redeems us finally, after much effort. So wonderful, wonderful hymn. Just an example of something for UAP 1. I got nervous thinking about UAP 2. I got nervous of ideologies and manipulation of liturgy. Yes. Third point there, resist the temptation to manipulate prayer and liturgy. And we've all been at sermons where the reading says X and the sermon takes off in a different direction on the hobby horse of the preacher, and it's so unfair to the people. But yes, the social demands of the gospel must be integral to prayer and liturgy. And it's important, also with an O, to balance the social and personal dimensions of our lives. This is a great picture of refugees arriving off the coast of Italy, I think. I haven't seen recent research, but I saw some research in the last years that those who are practicing Catholics or Christians were more likely to be compassionate and welcoming of refugees. But I think that may have changed when I think of Hungary and the politics of the Hungarian government now, waving a Catholic flag and having quite a bit of difficulty with the welcoming of migrants. It's a complex issue, of course. but the way in which liturgy and scripture can sensibilize people and make them squilibrato or squilibrati, off balance a bit, make them discern, make them think, make them pray, and really move deeper, resisting the polarizing ideologies of a Trump era or of a Marine Le Pen era or of the right wing here in Italy. Accompanying young people in the creation of a hope-filled future. The General is setting up a global Ignatian young adult network soon, precisely to try and tease out this preference. And he said recently, walking with the poor puts us with the young, since most of the young are poor. And we can ask, well, how do we convert ourselves, that word conversion, into instruments with the young for change? The Synod on Young People, the Faith and Vocational Discernment. Again, I won't read the whole quotation, but you can read the bits in red or in maroon. Fresh, authentic, and joyful liturgy. In some parts of the world, liturgical experience is the principal resource for Christian identity. Young see the liturgy as a point of departure from mission. That's positive. But then it goes on to say, in general, there's little by way of educational accompaniment for living the liturgical celebration profoundly. So, food for thought for all of us. And the last preference there, to collaborate in the care of the common home. Our efforts from Laudato Si, our efforts at education will be inadequate and ineffectual unless we strive to promote a new way of thinking about human beings, life, society, and our relationship with nature. New way of thinking. And then Maeve Heaney says that there lies the primary implication for liturgical theology and practice. For the liturgy is one of the fundamental spaces in which Catholic imagination is in fact formed. So she's throwing down a challenge to us, this new way of thinking, and she's bringing back the word imagination, which is so crucial. Liturgy is one of the fundamental spaces in which Catholic imagination is in fact formed. When I worked in Africa, I remember having a Eucharist in a slum in Nairobi. And it was in a small little house in a slum. Maybe there were 8 of us at the Eucharist. Children running in and out of the room, an open sewer outside. And the gospel reading was where Jesus says, those who are last will be first, and the first will be last. And we had a shared homily. And the woman of the house, who I'd say was 40 and terribly poor, she said, oh, really, I don't understand that reading. Who are these people who are last? I wanted to say to her, it's you, it's obvious. And you're going to be first. This is the dream. This is the promise. And myself and a fellow priest were in tears in this Eucharist. I cry now and then. The fellow priest was famous for being quite an angry person, not given to crying. But he was in tears. And to add to the poignancy, I looked up at the walls of the house, and the wallpaper was composed of the first pages or the first few pages of the World Bank annual reports. this immense poverty situation. And then on the wall, World Bank report, 2002, World Bank report 2003, big finance. So the contrasts. This was one of the most amazing Eucharists I've been at. And I'm sure you can identify Eucharists where where thinking about the preferences and putting that experience with the preferences, you can make the links yourselves. This was, obviously now I say, oh yeah, UAP too, tick the box. Wonderful, wonderful experience of God's grace in the middle of poverty and oppression and injustice.
John, you might want to bring it home if you want. It's about 35 minutes.
Summary.
Sure.
Coming to the summary. Dream, imagination, liberation, possibility, discernment. Some of the key words that I think summarize what I'm trying to say. They're kind of invitations to you to take those words further and say, yes, that links with my academic research or my liturgical practice. Reflection, questions. Where do I already see the Lord bringing about transformation through liturgy? And what resistances am I aware of? And how can liturgy help get under those resistances and promote healing? I'll send this PowerPoint for what it's worth to. It's very much the beginning of a reflection that we're making on liturgy and the preferences. Going towards a new dream for a new world. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That was very refreshing and stimulating. So we have some time. I think we can take 15 or 20 minutes. Eucharist is supposed to begin at 6, but we can cut the social a little shorter, I think. There's always wiggle room, I think. At least it's good for me to cut the social shorter. So
maybe there'll be no questions.
No. Well, that's right. That might ruin the questions, right? Questions you might once again identify yourself too. So John can know who you are and where you're from. So Mark will bring the microphones around. Paul Genoy.
John Paul Genoyak from Berkeley, and I teach at the Jesuit School of Theology, which is a school of theology and ministry, forming both lay and religious for ministry in the church. And one of the things about a person teaching liturgy, and I kind of agree with Julien Lefont, that the liturgy is the ultimate poem of thanksgiving. And it's a way of engaging the ineffable mystery. That's the part that you were talking about earlier. But when you're in a place that's forming people, it's in constant tension, which I see happening nowadays with this push toward assessment and achievable goals, and which is common in most strategic plans. So I just heard recently the ATS told the MDiv director, you need to come up with tools of assessment that say, you've got it, or you're a minister in the church. And so that tension I see is palpable. I don't know if you agree with that.
I do. I did a wonderful course in preaching when I was in Toronto with a man from the United Church of Canada, actually, and where I also got to know Charlie. And he helped me to explore imagination, liturgy, integration of exegesis. So I do decry a bit the assessment, and I see that the Jesuit students here in Rome, in the Jesuit, very, very preoccupied with exams and study, and maybe Keith, you have a perspective on that too. And I think it can kill imagination and kill risk-taking, and yeah, so I'm kind of agreeing with you. I am agreeing with you, in fact, not kind of. Yeah, very much. Just a little aside, I was at dinner once in the Curia last year, and there were 4 or 5 of us, and I kind of launched a conversation starter saying, for a Jesuit to pass from regency to theology, what one thing would you guys look for? So I said, I'll start. I said, I think the guy should really be in love with Jesus and, really show a passion for prayer. And somebody else said, and the last guy said, he was actually an American, he said, can the guy do a day's work? And we all said, yes, that's actually true. So thanks.